What was meant to be a fun graduation trip, the kind everyone thought would become a bright and unforgettable holiday memory, suddenly twisted into something frightening and tragic. The massive liner carrying the students through the open sea was caught helplessly in the grip of a savage storm. The captain's voice rang out over the speakers, urgently commanding everyone to get off the deck and move below as fast as possible. Panic spread across the ship in an instant, and the terrified students rushed wildly from one side to the other, desperate to reach the safety of their cabins. Amid all that chaos and confusion, the young man suddenly heard a strange voice inside his head, one he had never heard before, calmly telling him that he had successfully received a rookie package. Completely confused, the guy had no idea what was happening to him or why. At first, he tried to convince himself it was only his imagination playing tricks on him, but then a flood of strange, unfamiliar knowledge began pouring into his mind so vividly that he could no longer ignore it. The virtual system informed the young man that the objects in front of him were coconuts, and almost instantly a detailed display appeared, showing information about the tree's height, physical structure, and even the plant's biological and survival value. Without warning, the guy lunged forward, snatched up a poisonous snake with shocking speed, and slammed it hard against a tree. In that single, fierce moment, he saved the nearby girl from serious danger. The young man had always taken his teacher's advice seriously, almost treating it like a rule. So when the time came to choose, he deliberately picked the exact same model his teacher had recommended and used himself. As the boy sliced through the tough, fibrous shell of the coconut, he quietly thought about how right he had been to buy the same knife as his teacher. At that moment, the choice felt smarter and more valuable than ever. The young man silently gave thanks to the life buoy beside him, knowing very well that it was the one thing that had kept him alive. Without it, he understood, he would never have survived. He had been convinced that he was completely alone on the island and that no one else had made it there. To him, the place seemed utterly deserted. But after a while, movement in a nearby thicket caught his attention, and he realized there was a girl hiding there. The young people sat around a small fire, worn out and tense, trying to make the best of impossible conditions. One of the guys was struggling to boil water in a plastic bottle, using every trick and improvised method he could think of to make it work. A large crowd of students had gathered on the enormous deck of the tourist liner, buzzing with excitement. Then a loud voice announced that the school's top student was about to confess his love to the school goddess, a girl named Helen. With completely sincere feelings written all over his face, the young man dropped to one knee before the girl and held out a huge bouquet of beautiful roses, offering them to her with trembling but honest devotion. The people surrounding them immediately burst into loud applause, cheering and calling out for Helen to accept. Their voices filled the air, pushing the romantic moment forward and making it feel even more dramatic and intense. The students whispered among themselves, talking quietly about the guy and praising him as a truly promising young man. In their eyes, he had everything: good looks, talent, and outstanding academic success, all of which were proven by the impressive scholarship he received. Off to the side, the protagonist sat by himself, watching a survival talk show with deep concentration. He was so absorbed in what was happening on the screen that everything around him seemed to fade into the background. After finishing yet another episode of the survival show, the guy let out a tired yawn and stretched a little, loosening his shoulders as though he were finally coming back to the real world after being lost in it for a while. Then, without warning, a few cold raindrops landed on his face. He looked up in surprise, because only a short while earlier the weather had been perfectly clear, and there had been no sign at all that the sky was about to turn. The weather changed with terrifying speed. Dark storm clouds swallowed the sky, and the mood on deck shifted instantly. Over the loudspeaker, the captain's voice announced that the ship had entered a storm zone and ordered everyone to leave the deck immediately. Panic erupted among the students on deck, and they scrambled desperately toward their cabins, pushing forward as fast as they could. Each of them clung to the hope that shelter below would still be safe. The protagonist gripped the railing tightly, his hands almost locked around it, as he realized just how serious the situation had become. The storm kept growing stronger by the second, and it was now openly threatening all of their lives. The guy quickly came to believe that trying to run back to the cabins was already pointless. Instead, he decided that his only real chance of survival was to reach the life buoys, which suddenly seemed far more important than anything else. His classmates tried to stop him, shouting that he should obey the captain's order and head straight to his cabin. But the protagonist ignored them and kept moving slowly toward a life preserver, even noticing along the way a luxurious bouquet of roses lying abandoned on the deck, forgotten in the chaos. At last, despite the violent rocking of the ship and the dangerous footing beneath him, the young man managed to reach the life preserver. He grabbed it tightly, holding on with desperate strength as a small but real sense of hope rose inside him. In the very next moment, a gigantic wave crashed into the ship with overwhelming force, flipping it violently and sending everything into ruin. The liner began sinking rapidly, dragged down toward the depths before anyone could truly react. The young man lost consciousness, and as darkness swallowed him, the last thing he heard was a strange, unfamiliar voice calmly informing him that the survival system had been activated. The young man was eventually washed ashore, lying unconscious on the beach, while the virtual system coldly reported that the newbie data packages had been successfully downloaded. It then asked whether he wished to activate them for further action. The boy slowly regained consciousness and abruptly opened his eyes. He was filled with deep shock, shaken not only by the shipwreck itself, but also by the strange, incomprehensible dream that still lingered vividly in his memory. The young man looked across the coastline and noticed the clear signs of the recent disaster scattered around him. In that moment, he quietly thanked fate for letting him survive and escape the grim end that had likely claimed most of the other passengers. The protagonist sat with his back against a large palm tree, letting the warm tropical sun dry his soaked clothes little by little. At the same time, he carefully examined the life preserver that had kept him from drowning. The young man felt certain that there were no signs of human life anywhere on the island. To him, it looked completely deserted, and he clung to the hope that a search and rescue team would surely find him within 5 days. His attention was suddenly drawn by a series of heavy thuds striking the ground nearby, and the boy soon realized that coconuts were falling from the trees. The discovery filled him with an almost overwhelming sense of relief and joy. That sight gave him real hope, because there were many coconut trees growing across the island. Their fruit, he realized, might be enough to help him stay alive until rescuers finally arrived. He started opening the thick coconut husks with his camp knife, and while doing so, he remembered his teacher with quiet gratitude. It was his teacher who had recommended this sturdy and reliable tool in the first place. However, he soon discovered a problem. The coconuts were older than he had hoped, and they contained far less coconut milk than expected. That meant he would need at least 5 of them just to cover his most basic needs for a single day. He remembered the mysterious system from his visions, and almost at once a holographic screen appeared in front of him, greeting him like it had been waiting. Startled beyond belief, the guy spat out the coconut milk in his mouth and began choking in pure shock. The system calmly informed the young man that he had the option to open the newcomer's package, presenting it as if this were the most natural thing in the world and politely inviting him to do it right away. Still stunned, but forcing himself to stay calm, the guy decided to accept the system's offer. He reached out and firmly pressed the holographic screen, hoping this strange action would finally help him understand what was going on. The system congratulated the young man and informed him that he was now receiving knowledge labeled ordinary plants and ordinary animals. Instead of clearing things up, the announcement only left him with even more questions than before. Suddenly, bright flashes of energy burst around the guy and began forcing that information directly into his mind at incredible speed. The sensation was deeply strange, almost unreal, and it left him overwhelmed as he tried to endure it. The protagonist still could not fully believe that any of this was real. Part of him kept thinking it had to be a hallucination caused by exhaustion, fear, and stress. And yet, at the same time, he could clearly feel that an enormous amount of bizarre knowledge had truly entered his mind. A holographic screen appeared in front of the young man and informed him that he was holding coconut fruits. It then began displaying extensive information about the plant, including its usefulness, nutritional value, and practical survival benefits. A sudden, sharp cry from the nearby thicket broke through his thoughts, and instantly pulled his attention away. The sound was loud enough to make him tense up at once and turn wary. For the guy, this was deeply unsettling. He had been completely certain that the island was uninhabited, but now it was obvious that someone else was here, and that realization sent a fresh wave of tension through him. Reacting almost instantly to the cry, he was hit by a strong surge of anxiety and took off running toward the thicket where the sound had come from, driven by alarm and urgency. Forcing his way through the dense bushes, the guy shoved aside the heavy branches and pushed deeper into the tangled growth, trying to reach the source of the frightening noise as fast as possible. At last, he saw a girl in front of him. She was half naked, sitting on the sand and screaming loudly, her whole body tense with fear, as if something terrifying were right in front of her. The young man recognized her immediately. It was Helen, the top student at the university, the very same girl who had been the center of attention earlier on the deck of the liner. He quickly noticed a poisonous snake slowly moving toward the girl, and at once the system identified the reptile for him, supplying all the necessary encyclopedic details he needed to understand just how dangerous the threat really was. Helen was trembling badly, her voice shaking with fear as she looked at him in desperation. Barely holding herself together, she begged the young man to save her from the poisonous snake that was rapidly closing in on her. At the exact moment the snake suddenly lunges forward toward the girl, the young man reacts with incredible speed. He grabs the snake in mid-strike, stopping the reptile just inches before it can reach its target and bite her. Without wasting even a second, he swings the snake aside and slams it hard against the trunk of a nearby tree. The impact instantly neutralizes the threat, leaving the reptile motionless and the danger finally over. Helen's voice trembles badly as she tries to speak, clearly still shaken by what just happened. The young man briefly turns his face away and gently suggests that she should probably get dressed first so she can feel more comfortable before they talk. Realizing how awkward and vulnerable her situation looks, Helen takes a deep breath and tries to calm herself down. She slowly gathers her thoughts, preparing to explain how she ended up in such an embarrassing and frightening situation. After composing herself, she finally explains that she had hidden behind the trees to remove her soaked clothes and let them dry. She says she never imagined that something like a poisonous snake could appear while she was doing that. Helen watches the young man from a distance as he quietly moves around collecting coconuts. The more she observes him, the more she realizes that he is actually a good and reliable person who saved her life at a critical moment. She has always believed that she is quite beautiful and attractive, so she feels strangely irritated that the guy leaves so quickly and barely even glances in her direction, almost as if her presence means absolutely nothing to him. Deciding she will not simply ignore this situation, Helen slowly walks toward the young man. She intends to start a conversation with him and properly thank him for what he did. When she reaches him, Helen sincerely thanks him for saving her life and politely introduces herself, hoping the conversation will continue. The young man calmly replies that he already knows who she is and introduces himself as Chin. Suddenly, Helen's emotions break loose. She grabs Chin's hands tightly and begins speaking through tears, saying that she feels completely helpless because both of them ended up stranded here after the shipwreck. After a little while, Chin patiently comforts her and slowly helps her calm down. He hands her some fresh coconut milk to drink so she can regain her strength and steady her emotions. Once she settles down, Chin asks Helen if she happened to bring anything that might help them contact the outside world, such as a phone, a radio, or any device that could send a signal. Unfortunately, Chin soon learns that Helen washed ashore with nothing useful at all. Just like him, she has no equipment and no way to communicate with the outside world. Trying to stay positive, Helen says that their situation may not be as hopeless as it seems. She explains that a shipwreck is a major emergency, and in such cases rescue teams are always sent out quickly to search for survivors. Chin is honestly surprised by how optimistic she sounds. Considering the harsh circumstances they are facing, it is quite rare for someone to remain this calm and hopeful. Chin decides to support her optimism rather than challenge it. He agrees with her reasoning and says that it is very possible that rescue teams are already searching and could arrive sooner than they expect. Helen suddenly remembers the frightening snake encounter earlier. At that moment, Chin suggests that they should start a fire to keep insects and snakes away, since the dangers at night are likely to become even worse. The two of them head down toward the coastline, hoping to find something useful for making a fire. For nearly an hour they wander along the sand and between the rocks, searching carefully, but they still fail to find anything obvious. While staring out toward the distant horizon, Chin cannot shake the feeling that this place has almost no trace of human presence at all. The island seems isolated, as if it exists completely cut off from the rest of the world. Meanwhile, Helen spots an empty plastic bottle lying half-buried in the hot sand near the shore. At first her face shows disappointment because she had hoped there might be water or some other useful liquid inside. She is about to throw the useless bottle away when Chin suddenly notices what she is about to do and quickly tells her not to discard it. Helen looks at him with confusion and asks what possible use an empty bottle could have in their situation. Chin simply smiles and says she will understand soon enough because the bottle can actually help them. He explains that he plans to use the bottle to start a fire and remembers a clever trick he once saw demonstrated on a survival television show. Chin fills the bottle with clear water and carefully positions it so that it works like a magnifying lens, concentrating the bright sunlight into a small focused point. To their excitement, the trick actually works. The concentrated sunlight slowly ignites dry material, and soon a small flame appears. It becomes their very first real success since arriving on the island. As evening slowly approaches, shadows begin to spread across the island. The two young survivors sit close to the fire, enjoying its warmth and finally feeling a little safer than before. Helen nervously asks Chin how long he thinks it might take for rescuers to find them. The thought that they might starve before help arrives clearly frightens her. Chin understands that keeping her spirits up is extremely important. In survival situations, he knows that losing hope can be just as dangerous as hunger or injury. He confidently tells her that rescue operations after shipwrecks usually take only a few days. At worst, they might need to survive here for about a week, and the many coconut trees nearby should provide enough food and drink. After saying that, Chin casually pulls out the dead snake he killed earlier. Helen looks at it with surprise and immediately asks what he plans to do with it. With a calm smile, Chin tells her she will find out soon. Then he begins skillfully cutting the snake apart, preparing it as if he has done this kind of thing before. Helen instantly realizes what he intends to do and feels deeply uncomfortable. The idea that he plans to cook and eat the snake for dinner clearly disgusts her. Chin honestly does not understand her reaction and asks why she looks so shocked. In his opinion, finding meat on the island is actually great luck. Helen firmly refuses and insists that she will never eat snake meat, even if hunger becomes unbearable. Chin shrugs and says that if she feels that strongly about it, she can simply stay hungry. He has no intention of arguing with her about food. Chin calmly begins eating the cooked snake and casually remarks about how crispy and tasty the meat is, clearly trying to tempt her. Helen is extremely hungry, but she stubbornly turns her head away, trying to hide how badly she actually wants food. Chin continues eating with obvious enjoyment, describing the flavor, texture, and smell of the meat in exaggerated detail, hoping to provoke her curiosity. Finally, Helen cannot take it anymore and angrily demands that he stop talking about it like that. However, only moments later, she quietly takes the skewer holding her portion and admits that he has successfully convinced her to at least try it. After tasting the first bite, Helen's expression changes with surprise. The roasted snake actually tastes much better than she expected. Chin comments that they were lucky to encounter a red snake today. Without it, they might have had nothing to eat that night. At that moment, Chin's attention shifts to the mysterious virtual system again. A holographic screen appears before his eyes announcing that he has earned 100 survival points for successfully making a fire. Helen notices him making strange gestures in the air and asks with concern what he is doing. Chin quickly improvises an excuse and says that an insect crawled inside his shirt. Chin realizes that he is the only one who can see the system interface. For now, he decides not to tell Helen about it and keeps this strange ability to himself. He quietly reflects on how unpredictable people can be. Even after spending an entire day with Helen, he still cannot fully understand what kind of person she truly is. If he revealed the existence of the system, she might think he had lost his mind or share the information with others later. Either possibility could create serious trouble. Exploring the system further, Chin opens the main menu and sees that he can earn survival points for completing certain tasks. He enters the virtual store and notices a long list of items available for purchase, although most of them cost far more points than he currently has. Among the many strange items displayed in the system store, one particular entry suddenly catches his attention. Its unusual title reads, "True Love in the Wild." The item has no explanation or details attached to it. Only a mysterious name appears on the screen. Even so, Chin cannot shake the feeling that this strange skill might actually prove extremely useful in their current survival situation. As he scrolls through the system store, Chin quickly realizes that everything available there costs a huge amount of points. The cheapest item requires at least 2,000 points, while his account currently holds only 100, making it impossible for him to purchase anything. Chin notices something else that bothers him. The system's main page shows no clear list of tasks or missions, which leaves him confused about how he is supposed to earn additional points. He begins thinking about their current food supply and concludes that coconuts can keep them alive for a while. However, coconuts mainly contain carbohydrates and very little protein, which could eventually become a serious nutritional problem. Because of this concern, the young man decides that the next day they should explore the beach during low tide and search for fish, shrimp, or any small sea creatures that may have been left behind by the receding water. Even though he is extremely tired and mentally exhausted after everything that happened, Chin still finds himself unable to fall asleep. Eventually, he gets up quietly and looks over at Helen, who is sleeping peacefully nearby. Watching how calmly Helen sleeps, Chin comes to an interesting conclusion. If she had truly been afraid of him, she would never have been able to fall asleep so quickly while he was sitting right next to her. The young man lifts his eyes toward the sky and notices the bright moon shining clearly above the island. He quietly tells himself that tomorrow they will need to discuss their plans and think carefully about how to survive here. When Chin finally does manage to fall asleep, his rest does not last long. He suddenly wakes up and opens his eyes immediately, sensing that something feels wrong. He shivers violently and realizes that the temperature has dropped drastically during the night. The once warm island air has suddenly turned surprisingly cold. Looking over at Helen, he notices that she is still asleep, but her body is trembling from the cold. Chin instantly understands that this situation could become dangerous if she continues sleeping like that. He quietly walks over to her and carefully reaches out, gently shaking her shoulder in an attempt to wake her without frightening her. As soon as his hand touches her, he feels how cold her skin has become. Helen is clearly exhausted from the stress of the day, and her body is responding slowly to what is happening around her. Suddenly, Helen wakes up with a loud scream, startled and confused. She immediately demands to know what Chin is doing and why he is touching her, her voice filled with panic. Still upset, Helen angrily declares that she thought he was a trustworthy person. Now she feels shocked and disappointed by what she believes is suspicious behavior. Chin quickly explains that he had no bad intentions at all. He simply wanted to warn her because the temperature had suddenly dropped and the cold could become dangerous. He advises her to move closer to the fire as soon as possible if she wants to warm up and avoid the risk of hypothermia. As the two of them sit near the fire trying to regain warmth, Chin begins to realize just how extreme the temperature changes on this island can be between day and night. He starts thinking seriously about how they can deal with the cold nights ahead, since neither of them has enough clothing to handle such sudden weather changes. Helen asks in confusion how the island could feel so warm and comfortable during the day, yet become painfully cold at night, as if they had been transported somewhere completely different. Chin admits that if things continue like this, freezing during the night could become a real danger. He suggests that they sit close together or even hug to preserve body heat, but Helen immediately rejects the idea. The two young survivors sit silently around the small fire, both trying to absorb whatever warmth they can from the fading flames. Despite sitting close to the fire, Helen still feels her hands and feet becoming painfully cold. Her fingers are starting to feel stiff and numb. She secretly glances at Chin and begins wondering if his suggestion might actually be necessary for them to survive the night. However, she hesitates because she has never been that physically close to a man before. Finally, gathering her courage, Helen stands up and firmly tells Chin that they may have no choice but to do what he suggested if they want to stay alive. Embarrassed by the situation, she nervously asks Chin to close his eyes and not look at her for a moment. Chin looks confused and asks why she suddenly plans to take off her clothes. Helen explains that she once saw a scene in a television show where people removed clothing in extreme situations to help conserve body heat. Chin gently tells her that their situation is different. Their clothing is already thin, so removing it would only make them colder rather than warmer. He calmly reassures her that there is no need for such measures. Simply sitting close together and sharing warmth will be enough. Although Helen feels extremely embarrassed and tense at first, she gradually begins to feel warmth returning to her body. Little by little she relaxes, her eyes slowly closing as exhaustion finally overtakes her, and she drifts into a deep and peaceful sleep. The next morning arrives with bright sunshine. Helen wakes up feeling refreshed and happily announces that it is already morning. The two of them quietly watch the beautiful sunrise together as the sky fills with warm shades of orange and gold, creating a moment of unexpected peace. Suddenly, Chin notices that the tide has retreated far from the shore. Excitedly, he rushes toward the beach and calls Helen to follow him. Helen quickly joins him as they begin exploring the wet shoreline. Suddenly, she screams in pain when a crab grabs onto her hand with its claw. Without looking up from what he is doing, Chin calmly tells her to grab a nearby stone and use it to break the crab's grip. Helen quickly finds a sharp rock on the ground and strikes the crab's shell firmly, forcing it to release her hand. Feeling proud of herself, she announces her success and looks happily at the crabs they have gathered, imagining the delicious breakfast they will soon enjoy. Using his camp knife, Chin skillfully opens the shellfish and prepares the crabs for cooking. Watching him work, Helen asks why he throws away the shells when there still seems to be a small amount of meat left inside. Chin smiles and gently tells her not to be greedy, explaining that they should avoid eating too much at once. He explains that crab meat can be difficult to digest if eaten excessively, and the last thing they need on the island is stomach trouble. After finishing their breakfast, Chin tells Helen that they should not stay on the beach tonight. He believes they need to move deeper into the forest and build a proper shelter. Helen does not seem very enthusiastic about leaving the shore, but Chin reminds her of how cold the previous night had become. She asks why they must go into the forest instead of building something right on the beach. Chin explains that the forest will provide stronger materials and possibly more food sources. He tells Helen to finish eating quickly because they still need to gather water before they begin their journey inland. Chin looks up at a tall coconut tree and notices a cluster of coconuts hanging high above them. As Chin begins removing his belt, Helen gasps in surprise and covers her face with her hands. Without noticing her confusion, Chin quickly ties the belt into a simple climbing device and explains that he once saw this technique used in a travel show. The method is called the two-legged rope, and it helps people climb trees safely. The idea behind the method is quite simple, but very clever. The rope increases friction between the climber's feet and the rough surface of the tree trunk, almost as if the feet are sticking to the bark, which makes climbing much more stable and manageable. However, after struggling for several minutes, Chin begins to realize that climbing a tall palm tree is far more difficult than he had imagined. The trunk is smooth and tall, and every movement requires real effort. Even so, he refuses to give up and slowly continues climbing until he finally reaches the top. From there, he carefully calls down to Helen and asks her to step back to a safe distance so she won't get hurt when the coconuts start falling. Holding tightly to the trunk with one arm, Chin takes out his camp knife and begins carefully cutting the coconuts from the cluster, working as quickly and safely as he can. Helen opens one of the freshly dropped coconuts and tastes the milk. Almost immediately, she notices something surprising. It tastes much fresher than the ones they had earlier, and these coconuts contain far more liquid. Chin pours the coconut milk into the plastic bottle so they can carry it easily during their journey. Once the bottle is filled, he tells Helen they are finally ready to move deeper into the island and start searching for materials to build a shelter. While preparing to leave, Chin notices that Helen is still carrying several whole coconuts. Confused, he asks why she insists on taking them when they already collected enough liquid. Helen explains that every bit of supply could help them survive, but Chin warns her that drinking too much coconut milk can actually cause vomiting or stomach problems. After hearing this explanation, Helen decides that it really isn't worth risking her health. She reluctantly drops the extra coconuts onto the ground. Accepting that caution is the smarter choice, the two survivors slowly begin walking toward the nearby forest, hoping to find a safer place to build a shelter. Before entering the jungle, Chin takes a moment to arrange several large stones on the beach to form a clear SOS signal. He hopes that rescuers flying overhead might notice it. Ironically, he once believed that living in the wild would be exciting, but now all he wants is to return home and lie comfortably on his sofa. As he steps into the forest, Chin cannot help feeling uneasy. The dense shadows between the trees make him feel as if unseen eyes are watching them from every direction. He hands the bottle of coconut milk to Helen. She eagerly drinks several gulps, clearly relieved as the cool liquid refreshes her body. After finishing, she returns the bottle to Chin but carefully warns him to drink without touching the bottle's neck with his lips, trying to keep it as clean as possible. As they walk deeper into the forest, Helen asks Chin what exactly they are searching for among all these trees. She notices that he keeps looking around carefully, as if he is tracking something specific rather than wandering randomly. Chin explains that the snake he killed earlier belongs to a species that usually lives close to freshwater sources, only leaving the water area when hunting for prey. Helen quickly guesses that this means a freshwater source must exist somewhere nearby. Chin smirks slightly and jokingly compliments her impressive detective skills. He then points to the flattened grass ahead of them and the broken branches along the path. These signs suggest that animals frequently pass through here, likely traveling to drink water. Helen is genuinely impressed by Chin's reasoning. She begins to feel lucky that she ended up stranded with someone who understands nature so well. However, her admiration fades slightly when she realizes that Chin often uses his knowledge to tease her with small sarcastic remarks. Curious, she asks how he learned so much about survival in the wild. Chin laughs and admits that most of his knowledge actually came from watching survival shows and reading about wilderness skills online. Looking around at the vast forest, Chin realizes that the jungle is much larger than he first thought. If they fail to find water before noon, he decides they will need to make another fire to save time later. Suddenly, both of them stop walking. Helen whispers that she hears a strange sound somewhere nearby. Chin listens carefully for a moment, and then his expression suddenly brightens as he recognizes the sound. Grabbing Helen's hand, he excitedly tells her to follow him quickly because he is almost certain he knows what they just heard. After pushing through the trees for several minutes, they emerge into a clearing where a fast-flowing stream of fresh water rushes across the ground. Both of them burst into smiles and congratulate each other. Finding a reliable source of fresh water feels like a major victory. Chin feels especially relieved. Discovering water before noon means they will not have to worry about dying of thirst. Helen kneels beside the stream and scoops some water into her hands, but she hesitates before drinking it. She explains that the water might contain bacteria or harmful microorganisms, so drinking it directly could make them seriously ill. They continue walking further into the forest. Helen wonders why they did not simply build their shelter beside the water. Chin explains that setting up camp right next to the stream would be dangerous because wild animals also come there to drink, which could put them in serious danger. He then hands Helen the knife and says he will start gathering wood while she collects materials that can be used to build the shelter. Helen walks into a nearby patch of thick plants, searching carefully for large leaves that could serve as roofing for their shelter. The jungle environment is extremely humid, which makes it difficult to find dry wood. Despite this challenge, Chin eventually manages to gather some pieces suitable for starting a fire. While exploring the area, he remembers passing several thin trees that could serve as strong support poles for their future shelter. He also recalls watching a survival program that explained how primitive stone axes could be made using simple materials found in nature. Finding a suitable stone, Chin begins striking it against another rock, carefully shaping the edge in hopes of creating a sharp cutting tool. After working on it for some time, he manages to produce a surprisingly sharp stone blade. Realizing he doesn't have time to build a perfect tool, he decides it will be good enough. Using the sharpened stone, Chin begins cutting down several thin trees that will serve as the basic structure for their shelter. The work turns out to be exhausting. Each small tree requires significant effort, and cutting down even one takes nearly half an hour. By the end of the day, Chin has only managed to cut 9 trees. Feeling tired but satisfied, he decides it is time to return to their campsite. After tying the logs together with strong vines, Chin lifts the bundle onto his shoulder and slowly begins walking back toward the camp. When he reaches the clearing, Helen happily calls out that she is relieved to see him again. She had started to worry about how long he had been gone. Proudly, she shows him several huge banana leaves she managed to collect and explains that a whole area of banana plants grows nearby. Chin nods and says they still need much more material, but the leaves she gathered will definitely help. For now, he explains that they will build a simple temporary shelter, just enough to protect them from the cold night. Helen asks him how they will attach the large banana leaves to the wooden frame they are building. Chin explains that he will sharpen the ends of the wooden poles and create support rods that will hold the structure together. Using a heavy stone as a hammer, the young man begins driving the sharpened wooden rods into the ground, slowly forming the basic frame of their shelter. After securing the wooden frame with several strong vines, Chin carefully lays wide banana leaves across the top and sides of the structure. Layer by layer, he covers the frame until the simple shelter begins to resemble a small hut. Helen studies the finished structure with a doubtful expression. She remarks that it hardly looks like a comfortable or warm house and seems more like a pile of leaves than a real shelter. Chin patiently explains that they had very limited time and materials to work with. Even though it may not look impressive, this shelter will block the wind and allow the warmth from the fire to reach them during the night. At that moment, a notification from the virtual system suddenly appears before Chin's eyes. The system informs him that he has received 1,000 points for successfully building what it sarcastically describes as a disgusting tent. Meanwhile, Helen continues talking and complaining about the design of the shelter, completely unaware that a glowing holographic screen is floating right in front of Chin's face. Chin sighs quietly to himself. It seems that not only Helen finds his work unimpressive, even the mysterious system is mocking his efforts. Helen suddenly stops speaking and studies Chin's face carefully, noticing his strange reaction and wondering what he is thinking about. Later, using the empty plastic bottle, the two survivors collect water from the stream and carefully heat it over the fire until it boils, hoping to remove harmful bacteria and make it safe to drink. Chin gently warns Helen not to drink the hot water too quickly. He worries she might burn herself if she rushes while it is still steaming. After drinking enough to satisfy her thirst, Helen hands the bottle back to Chin and once again reminds him not to place his lips on the neck of the bottle. Chin feels relieved that they have at least solved the problem of warmth for the night. Now his thoughts begin shifting toward food, since coconuts and seafood alone will not sustain them forever. While thinking about their food situation, Chin notices Helen standing nearby and enthusiastically waving her arms to shake away insects. Watching her struggle with the bugs gives Chin another idea. He decides that tomorrow they should visit the banana grove she mentioned earlier to see if it can provide them with additional resources. At that very moment, a large mosquito lands directly on the back of Chin's hand. Reacting instantly, Helen swings her hand and slaps Chin's arm hard in an attempt to kill the mosquito before it bites him. Seeing the annoyed look on his face, Helen quickly apologizes for hitting him so hard and explains that she was only trying to drive the mosquito away. Chin's concern grows as he notices more mosquitoes gathering around them. He recalls hearing that some jungle mosquitoes can be dangerous and leave painful swelling after a single bite. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, Helen becomes nervous and asks Chin to do something quickly. Chin cups his hands and blows a long whistling sound, which surprisingly drives many of the insects away. After that, he grabs a leafy branch from a nearby bush and begins brushing away the remaining mosquitoes hovering around them. To strengthen their defense, Chin tosses several green branches into the fire so that thick smoke begins to rise. Soon a heavy cloud of smoke surrounds the shelter, and the mosquitoes quickly retreat from the irritating fumes. Chin tells Helen to endure the smoke for a while. Even though breathing it is unpleasant, it is currently their best protection against the insects. He feels satisfied with the hut's design because the walls successfully block the wind. Instead of feeling the cold breeze from the ocean, they now feel warmth spreading around them. However, Chin reminds Helen that the forest may contain wild animals, which means someone should stay awake and keep watch during the night. Just as he finishes explaining this idea, Chin suddenly notices that Helen is no longer listening. She has fallen asleep while sitting upright from sheer exhaustion. Smiling slightly, Chin carefully approaches her and gently lays her down in a comfortable spot near the hut so she can rest properly. Realizing he will have to stay awake alone tonight, Chin decides to keep himself busy. He begins weaving a rope from strips of tree bark that might prove useful later. As dawn arrives, the first rays of sunlight slowly illuminate the forest. Birds begin singing loudly, filling the air with the lively sounds of a new morning. Helen wakes up to the cheerful songs of the birds. Stretching her arms, she realizes she slept surprisingly well and did not feel cold during the night. As she looks around the camp, Helen notices a thick rope lying near the fire and asks Chin with curiosity how he managed to make it. Chin, who looks tired after staying awake all night, turns toward her with irritation. He complains that he had to keep watch alone while she slept peacefully. Helen quickly apologizes, explaining that she had been so exhausted that she does not even remember when she fell asleep. Chin sighs and apologizes for losing his temper. He admits that he was simply tired and suggests they create a fair schedule so they can share night watch duties equally. Later, the two of them stand beside the stream. Chin asks Helen exactly where she had seen the banana grove. Helen points toward the eastern direction and explains that while Chin was building the hut, she followed the stream and eventually discovered the grove. The pair head toward the banana grove together. Along the way, they discover bushes covered with small berries. At that moment, the system provides Chin with useful information about the plant. Chin picks several berries and offers them to Helen. He explains that these berries appear between April and May and are known to help with kidney health and even relieve cold symptoms. Helen asks if the berries taste good. Chin laughs and encourages her to try them herself instead of asking him. After tasting one, Helen immediately squeezes her eyes shut and clenches her fists. She complains that the berries are extremely sour. Chin casually tosses the remaining berries away and explains that they are still early-season raspberries, which means they naturally taste sour before fully ripening. After walking a little further, they finally arrive at the banana grove where wild Musa banana plants grow. The system instantly provides Chin with detailed information about the species. Helen frowns at the fruit hanging from the trees and remarks that the bananas look very green and unappetizing. Chin shrugs and says they cannot be picky since they have limited options. Chin examines the rope he made earlier and quickly realizes that it is not strong enough to support his full weight. Instead of climbing, he ties a stone to the rope to create a throwing tool. With a strong swing, he hurls it toward a large cluster of bananas while telling Helen to step back. The rope successfully catches onto a thick banana blossom and becomes tightly tangled around it. Using all his strength, Chin begins pulling on the rope in an attempt to tear the heavy bunch of bananas from the tree. However, the bananas cling stubbornly to the tree, refusing to come loose despite his efforts. Determined not to give up, Chin pulls even harder. Suddenly, a loud cracking sound echoes through the grove, and the entire banana cluster crashes down, right on top of him. Alarmed, Helen rushes over and quickly pushes away the large leaves and branches, hoping Chin has not been seriously hurt. Suddenly, a hand appears from beneath the pile of leaves holding a freshly plucked banana. Chin cheerfully offers it to Helen, but she frowns and complains that he keeps using her as a test subject for unknown food. Noticing the disappointment written all over the girl's face, Chin realizes she clearly doesn't trust the strange wild banana they found. Wanting to prove that it isn't dangerous, and perhaps to cheer her up a little, he decides to try it himself first, hoping his actions will ease her doubts and show that he isn't asking her to do anything he wouldn't do himself. With an easy smile, Chin reassures her that he never intended to take advantage of her in the first place. He explains that he was only trying to behave like a proper gentleman. Then, without hesitation, he takes a bite of the wild banana. Almost immediately, he makes a face and tells Helen that the fruit's flavor is far from pleasant. The texture is stiff and unpleasantly firm, and the taste is dull with almost no sweetness at all. Helen studies the fruit thoughtfully and suggests that maybe the problem is simply that it isn't ripe yet. Perhaps, she proposes, they should try another one just to be certain before giving up on it entirely. Chin shakes his head and calmly explains that the issue has nothing to do with ripeness. He tells her that this particular type of banana tree hasn't gone through the mutation process that created modern edible bananas. Because of that, its fruit is packed with hard seeds, making it almost impossible for humans to eat comfortably. After finishing his explanation, Chin casually tosses the chewed remains of the banana aside. With a shrug, he remarks that there is absolutely nothing tasty about it anyway. If someone is truly hungry, he says, it would be far better to focus on eating meat instead of wasting time on such fruit. Helen looks at him with confusion and admits that she really doesn't understand his strange sense of humor. Chin, however, immediately corrects her, insisting that he isn't joking at all. In fact, he says quite seriously, they actually can eat meat that grows with the help of a banana tree. The girl assumes he must be teasing her again and gives him a skeptical look. Chin simply gestures for her to come closer instead of arguing. If she looks carefully with her own eyes, he says, she will understand exactly what he means. Chin lifts up a broad banana leaf and reveals a large plump larva resting on its surface. He explains calmly that this is the meat he was talking about. Helen stares at the wriggling insect in genuine surprise and asks if people can really eat something like that, and whether it could possibly taste good. Chin finds her reaction quite unexpected. Many people would panic or recoil at the sight of such a creature, yet Helen remains surprisingly composed. Her calm curiosity in a situation that normally disgusts others makes him look at her with a bit of new respect. Soon the young man prepares a small fire and places a simple brazier over the flames. They begin roasting the larvae carefully. As they cook, Chin explains that even though these larvae might not win any awards for flavor, they contain nearly 6 times more protein than beef, making them extremely nutritious and valuable for survival. After patiently waiting for a while, Chin checks the roasting larvae and finally announces that they are ready. With a satisfied nod, he says it is time for them to try their unusual meal. To Chin's surprise, Helen shows almost no hesitation. Instead of acting disgusted, she bravely tastes one of the roasted larvae. After chewing thoughtfully, she remarks that the flavor is actually quite pleasant. It even reminds her a little of lobster paste, which leaves Chin staring at her in amazement. Helen bursts into cheerful laughter and tells him that these roasted maggots are far better than the awful snake meat she had to eat earlier. Compared to that unpleasant experience, she says, this meal feels almost luxurious. Chin admits honestly that her reaction surprises him a lot. He had expected her to panic or refuse to even touch the banana worms. Instead, she accepted them without much fuss and even seems to enjoy the taste, which he never predicted. Helen explains that throughout her life, she has tried many kinds of unusual seafood and strange animals. Because of that experience, eating larvae doesn't seem particularly shocking to her. Besides, she adds with a small sigh, she is extremely hungry right now and has no intention of being picky when food is available. A little later, Helen suddenly notices Chin cutting their only plastic bottle into pieces. Alarmed, she quickly asks him why he would destroy such an important item, since it had been one of their most useful tools for storing water. Chin calmly replies that he has a very specific purpose in mind. He plans to turn the bottle into a simple device for catching fish. His explanation surprises Helen, who never imagined that a broken bottle could somehow help them with fishing. Chin explains that earlier he noticed many fish swimming near the mouth of the nearby stream. With a trap made from the bottle, he believes they will be able to capture small fish quite easily. This would add a completely new source of food to their survival diet. Helen listens carefully, but still looks puzzled. She asks how exactly a simple cut bottle could possibly trap fish, since she cannot quite picture how the idea would actually work in practice. Chin patiently explains the design of the trap. The cut bottle creates a narrow funnel-like entrance that acts like a tunnel. Small fish can easily swim inside following the current, but once inside, the narrow opening and opposing water flow make it very difficult for them to escape. Then he chuckles and adds an even simpler explanation. Swimming into the bottle is easy for the fish, he says with a grin. Swimming back out of it, however, is a completely different story. Even after hearing his plan, Helen still looks uneasy about losing their bottle. She reminds him that it had been their main container for drinking water and asks what they will use now that it has been destroyed. Chin calmly replies that they can easily use coconut halves as makeshift bowls. He goes on to explain that coconut shells can even withstand heat from a fire. By placing hot stones into the liquid inside the shell, they can gradually heat the water. After repeating the process several times, he believes the water can eventually be brought to a boil. Khan suggests that they should find a suitable location along the stream to place the trap. That way, the device can quietly work on its own while they continue doing other important tasks nearby. Helen looks around the area curiously and asks why he chose this particular spot for the trap instead of placing it closer to their camp, where it might be easier to monitor. Ken explains that this shaded part of the stream is perfect. Plants like water lettuce grow thickly here, and fish often hide beneath them for protection. Because of that, this spot is likely to have far more fish than other areas. Suddenly, Helen stops listening to his explanation and wrinkles her nose slightly. She asks him if he can smell a strange scent drifting through the air around them. After she mentions it, Shin begins to notice the strong fragrance as well. The smell seems oddly familiar, but he cannot immediately remember where he encountered it before. Thinking for a moment, he asks Helen to wait while he investigates. Helen steps into a wide-open clearing nearby and points toward the grass growing across the ground. She tells him that the unusual smell seems to be coming directly from these plants. At that moment, a notification from the system appears in front of the young man. It identifies the plant as mint, a member of the Lamiaceae family. The system explains that the leaves contain aromatic oils that spread through the air and naturally repel many insects. Shin becomes genuinely excited by this discovery. Realizing that mint could help protect them from irritating insects, he decides they should bring some plants back to their camp and grow them nearby. Helen immediately agrees, since she absolutely hates blood-sucking bugs, and enthusiastically starts gathering large bundles of mint. Seeing her excitement, Shin quickly asks her to slow down. He explains that they already have more than enough plants to protect their camp area, and collecting too many would simply be unnecessary effort. When they return to the camp, the two of them dig a shallow trench around the area. Carefully placing the mint plants into the soil, they create a living barrier that will hopefully keep insects away from where they sleep. Shin can't help thinking that today has turned out to be incredibly lucky. He never expected they would not only survive another day, but also discover mint, which could help them avoid the constant threat of biting insects. After finishing their work, Shin suggests that Helen should take the opportunity to rest and regain some strength. Later, when she feels better, they can head toward the sea again to gather more coconuts. Just then, a glowing holographic interface suddenly appears in front of Chin. The system informs him that he has received 200 points as a reward for crafting a stone axe earlier. Chin looks down at the stone axe in his hands with surprise and satisfaction. Realizing that he has earned 2 rewards from the system in a single day fills him with quiet excitement. Even so, he still doesn't fully understand what kinds of actions earn these mysterious points. He begins to suspect that creating more survival tools might be the key to collecting even greater rewards. Meanwhile, Helen watches him from the side, completely confused. She cannot understand why he suddenly looks so happy while staring at the stone axe. Still, she decides not to ask unnecessary questions. Later, the two of them arrive at the beach and immediately notice something strange. Beneath a palm tree lies a large pile of broken coconuts. Kiwa quickly realizes that some creature on the island is eating their potential food supply, and doing it far more efficiently than he ever could. Helen nervously suggests that maybe they are not alone on this island after all. Perhaps another person is living here. Shin shakes his head and points at the shattered coconut shell nearby, explaining that no human could split it apart with such raw force. Helen's imagination begins to run wild, and she nervously wonders if it could be a tiger or a lion roaming the island. Shin gently reassures her that such predators would never bother eating coconuts, so their presence here is extremely unlikely. As he studies the sand more closely, Ken suddenly notices a large footprint pressed deeply into the beach. He quickly realizes that this mark must belong to the mysterious coconut-eating creature. Helen recalls hearing stories about giant coconut crabs before and wonders aloud if that might be the creature responsible for the broken shells scattered around them. She nods thoughtfully and confirms that her guess makes sense. Judging from the tracks around them, he believes the marks indeed belong to a coconut crab. Curious and a little excited, the two of them decide to track down the crab responsible for the mess. They begin carefully following the trail across the sand. After walking for a short distance, Helen suddenly notices that the trail disappears. The tracks simply stop, leaving them unsure of where the crab went next. Chin slowly raises his head and studies a nearby palm tree. At that moment, the system informs him that coconut crabs are land-dwelling hermit crabs that can grow up to 1 meter long, making them the largest land-based arthropods in the world. Helen carefully looks at the enormous arthropod clinging to the tree and instinctively licks her lips. Judging by its size, she estimates that the crab must weigh several kilograms. Her eyes sparkle with determination as she declares that she wants to eat that huge crab. The only problem, she admits while staring up at the tree, is figuring out how they can possibly reach it. The two quietly slip behind a nearby palm tree and crouch low, using its thick trunk as cover. From there, they patiently watch the massive coconut crab perched above them, waiting for the right moment when it finally climbs down to the ground where they might have a chance to catch it. Helen whispers urgently to Chin, telling him to hurry up. From the way the crab is moving, she fears it might soon finish eating and climb up another tree, which would make catching it much harder. Chin calmly shakes his head and tells her not to rush. He reassures her that the crab isn't going anywhere anytime soon. After all, it has already discovered a convenient pile of coconuts here, and a creature like that won't just abandon such an easy food source. Still, Helen can hardly control her excitement. The thought of catching such a huge, juicy crab has completely taken over her mind, and she feels an almost desperate urge to capture it and cook it as quickly as possible. Coconut crabs are known for their incredible strength. Their powerful claws and jaws can crack open a tough coconut shell with surprising ease, almost as if they were simply peeling the skin off a soft banana. Chin slowly steps out from behind the tree and approaches the giant crab. In the dim light beneath the palm leaves, his expression looks strangely intense, almost frightening, as he carefully moves closer to the creature lurking on the sand. Chin casually reaches down and takes the coconut that the crab has just cracked open. In a playful tone, he praises the creature as if it were a hard-working assistant and encourages it to keep opening more coconuts for him. As he watches the crab closely, he begins to notice something unusual. Normally, creatures like this prefer to stay hidden during bright daylight and only come out at night. Yet this one seems completely comfortable wandering around in the open. Chin quickly grabs another coconut that the crab has already broken apart. He cannot help feeling amazed by how quickly the creature can split open such tough shells with its enormous claws. The crab finally realizes that someone is stealing its food. Instantly, it becomes aggressive and swings its huge claws toward Chin. Laughing lightly, he hops backward to avoid the attack and teasingly challenges the crab to try catching him. With a playful grin, he announces that it is time for the crab to repay the coconuts it has been stealing. Moving quickly, the young man pins the large creature down and secures it tightly with his rope. A short distance behind him, Helen calls out breathlessly, asking him to slow down because she can barely keep up with him. Chin answers without stopping, reminding her that they need to move quickly. The sun is already beginning to sink toward the horizon, and if they delay too long, they might not make it back to camp before darkness falls. Helen finally drops onto the warm sand with a tired groan. She admits that she cannot continue right now because the coconuts she has been carrying feel incredibly heavy. Seeing how exhausted she looks, Chin suggests they take a short break so she can recover her strength. As he looks out at the ocean during the evening low tide, a small feeling of regret passes through him. If only they had more daylight left, he thinks, they might have been able to catch even more creatures from the shore. Suddenly, Helen's composure breaks and tears begin to fill her eyes. Her voice trembles as she says that the third day is already coming to an end, yet there is still no sign of any rescue team searching for them. Seeing her like this pains Chin deeply. He opens his mouth, ready to say something encouraging that might comfort her and bring back her confidence. But before he can speak, Helen suddenly gathers herself. She slaps her cheeks lightly with both hands, forcing herself to snap out of her despair. Taking a deep breath, she says firmly that they shouldn't lose hope. She truly believes that they won't be abandoned on this lonely island and that help will eventually arrive. She reminds Chin that rescuers might simply arrive later than expected, perhaps even after a week, just as he once suggested. With renewed determination, she lifts the heavy coconuts again and insists they must keep moving before the sun disappears. Chin falls silent as heavy thoughts begin to weigh on his mind. Only now does he fully realize that 3 days have passed so quickly. A troubling idea crosses his mind, that if they are not found within a week, the search teams might eventually stop looking. When they return to check the bottle trap, they discover that it has successfully caught 3 small fish. Chin remarks that the river must be full of fish. Even so, he never expected that such a simple trap would only catch a few small ones. He begins cleaning the fish with careful movements and tells Helen to head back to camp first. He promises that he will finish here quickly and catch up with her shortly afterward. This time, instead of using banana worms, he decides to place the fish guts into the trap as bait. He believes the stronger smell will attract larger fish than before. Suddenly, a translucent holographic screen appears in front of Chin. The system informs him that the fishing task has been successfully completed and rewards him with 500 points. The news brings a satisfied smile to his face. With this reward, his total points have now reached 2,000, enough to finally visit the mysterious system store and possibly obtain something extremely useful. When he returns to the camp, he sees Helen arranging several stones together. Curious, he asks what she is trying to build. She explains that the coconut crab is so large that she needs to construct a bigger cooking stove. Before long, the fire is burning brightly. Together they begin preparing their dinner, which consists of the huge coconut crab along with the 3 small fish they caught earlier. After tasting the meal, Helen happily admits that the food is delicious. The crab meat is rich and satisfying, with a surprisingly sweet flavor that reminds her faintly of coconut. She says that this is the first time since arriving on the island that she finally feels completely full. Afterward, she prepares to sleep and asks Chin to wake her at midnight so they can switch turns keeping watch. Night slowly falls, and the surroundings grow darker and darker until the island is almost completely swallowed by shadows. Lying there, Helen feels uneasy, her mind constantly imagining that wild animals might suddenly appear from the darkness. Without warning, Chin suddenly grabs her shoulder sharply. Startled by the unexpected touch, Helen screams loudly into the night. She spins around in panic and begins wildly swinging the stone axe in her hands, shouting loudly as she tries to defend herself from the imagined danger. Breathing heavily, she scolds him for scaring her so badly and asks him not to do that again. Then she asks why he woke up so early, since she had not yet planned to wake him. Chin quietly replies that he couldn't fall asleep and offers to take her place on guard. Helen hesitates and asks whether he truly had enough rest. She remembers that he will now be standing guard for the 2nd night in a row, since she slept through the entire night yesterday without taking her shift. Chin simply smiles and tells her everything is fine. He jokes that she should get plenty of sleep, otherwise one day she might accidentally smash his head with that axe while dreaming. After she lies down again, Chin adds a few more pieces of wood to the fire. Watching the flames rise, he decides that this quiet moment is the perfect time to finally visit the system's virtual store. The night around him is peaceful and still. The only movement comes from the faint smoke rising slowly from the fire as it drifts upward and disappears among the dense leaves of the tall trees above. Hina heats some water using the fire and carefully drops several glowing hot stones into a cup made from half a coconut shell. Then he adds a few mint leaves to disinfect the water. In his mind, he feels reassured. As long as they can boil their water properly, the risk of dangerous bacteria and illness should be greatly reduced. He also finds that the mint leaves have a refreshing taste. Their cool flavor not only improves the water, but also helps him stay alert while he remains on watch.